Hey, it's T. I'm one of the geniuses at Ask Zylor. So let's just get started with the live session.
So the first question is dealing with a grade 9 question. So it's dealing with the perimeter of a complex shape. So the total perimeter of a L-shaped field is 800 feet. The longest side is 300 feet and the longest width is 100 feet. So I'm just going to draw a rough shape. So the longest side, let's say it's this is 300, and the longest width is 100 feet. The shortest sides are 50 feet and 50 feet, so I'm going to say this is 50, this is 50. Respectively, so what's the area of the field? So we're given the perimeter, and they're asking me for the area. So I can figure out the total area of my L-shaped field, or the entire box, and then subtract the area that's missing. Right, because I know what these lengths are, because if the total length is 100, and I know this is 50, this length is going to be 100 minus 50, or in other words, it's going to be 50, right? And this side is going to be, my total length is 300, but my shorter side is 50, so it's going to be 300 minus 50, so it's going to be 250. So I know what all my sides are now. I know this is going to be 50. I know this is going to be 250. Right? So if I were to find the total area, that's going to be 300 times 100 minus what I have within my shaded area, which is not included in my L-shaped field. So it's going to be 250 times 50. So this is going to end up being 300,000, so 30,000 minus 0.5552, that's 10, 12, 50, 12,000. So when I subtract the two, I end up with 17,500. Right, so let's recap what we're doing. So we're going through a question that's dealing with the perimeter of a complex shape. We're given the long side, which is 800. The perimeter is 800, the long side is 300 feet, the longest width is 100 feet, and the shortest sides are each 50. So I figured out that I can find the total area by finding the total area minus my area that's missing from my L-shaped field. So which is what I did, and I came up to 17,500 feet squared. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question. So the next question is dealing with substitution. So we have the sum of two numbers, which is 26. The sum of their squares is the minimum. So we're asked to find the numbers. So I'm going to say two numbers, x and y. X and y give me 26. And the sum of these squares is minimum. So x squared plus y squared is equal to a minimum number. So I'm just going to say p for now. Right? So I'm going to label my first equation 2, my first equation 1, second 2, and then I'm going to isolate my first equation for my y. So if I use the first equation and say y is equal to 26 minus x, I can go and substitute this into my second equation. Right? So then I have x squared plus 26 minus x squared is equal to my p. P is going to be my minimum value. Right? So if I evaluate my p, so p is equal to x squared plus, I'm going to expand my brackets to give me 676 minus 52x plus x squared. And then when I simplify this, I end up with 2x squared minus 52x plus 676. So then we have to find the vertex of this, because we're asked to find what is my minimum value. So how do I find the vertex? I'm going to complete the square. So p is equal to 2x squared minus 52. So I'm going to factor out a 2, leaving me x squared minus 26x plus 676. So then I'm going to find my 26, negative 26. I'm going to divide that by 2, and I'm going to square that to give me what my square is going to be to complete the square. So this is going to equal 169. So I'm going to introduce a plus and a minus 169. So I have 2x squared minus 26x plus 169 minus 169. And then I have a plus 676 on the outside. Right? So how do I get this into a perfect square? I'm going to get the negative 169 outside by multiplying it by 2. So this leaves me with 2x squared minus 26x plus 169. And then I have 676 plus minus 338. So this simplifies to, I can make this a perfect square now. So I have x, it's going to be minus 13 squared plus 338. So when does the minimum occur? When my x is equal to 13. That's where my vertex is. So if I remember my initial equation, which was 1, all the way back here, x plus y is equal to 26. So the sum of two numbers should be 26. So I found what x is. If I find what y is, x plus y is equal to 26. So if I know what x is, I can find out what y is. So my y is also going to be 13. So the two numbers that add up to 26 and the sum of the square of those is the minimum is going to be 13 and 13. It's going to be the exact same number. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. So there's a question asking about factoring. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have two questions. So we can factor. So let's go ahead and try the first one. So we have y is equal to 2x squared minus x minus 3. So the way we do these questions is we first need to see if it's a complex or simple trinomial. What I mean by that is if it's a simple trinomial, then my leading coefficient is just going to be 1. If it's any other number other than 1, then you have a complex trinomial. In this case, you have 2, so it's going to be considered a complex trinomial that we're trying to solve. So the way we go about doing this is we multiply the leading coefficient and the constant. So in this case, it's 2 multiplied by negative 3 to give me negative 6. And then we're looking for factors of negative 6 that add up to your b value. So your b value is negative 1. So factors for negative 6 could be 6 minus 1, could be 2, negative 3, or it could be a combination of the signs. So what I do is I recognize that the negative over here with the constant tells me that the two factors have a plus and a minus sign in beside them. Right? That's the only way I can get a negative constant, because if I multiply a plus and minus, I end up with a negative. If I multiply a negative and a negative, I end up with a plus. Or if I multiply a plus and a plus, I end up with a plus as well. Right? So the only way I can get a negative constant is if my two signs in my factors are opposite. So one has to be a positive, one has to be a negative. So if you have a question, you can send them, go to our account, go to our messages and send it in. Take a picture of it, send it in there, or you can type it out there as well. So when I get negative 6, again, I'm looking for factors of negative 6 that give me negative x, right? So if I have a plus and a minus, that tells me that the negative number will be the bigger number, because when I add them together, I have a negative number left. So let's see what I mean by that. So my factors could be 6, 1, 3, 2, and so on. So I'm going to choose 3, 2 because the difference of them is just 1, which is the number I'm looking for. Negative 1. So the way I can get 1 is if I do negative 3 plus 2. If I do plus 3 minus 2, I end up with a positive 1. So the only way to get a negative 1 is if I do negative 3 plus 2. So then I'm going to perform decomposition. So I have 2x squared minus x minus 3. So I'm going to break up this negative x into 2x and minus 3x, which is essentially the same equation as above. But the reason I do this is so I can factor by grouping. What I mean by that is I'm going to group the first two terms and the last two terms, and then I'm going to factor out a common term from both the two groups. So my first group, I can factor out a 2x, which leaves me with x plus 1. And for my second group, I can factor out a negative 3 to leave me with x plus 1. Right? So notice that from this expression, there's a common term, which is x plus 1. So that's what I'm going to factor out from this entire expression to leave me with 2x minus 3, which were my coefficients, or what the product was in front of my brackets. And then we're done. We got x plus 1 and 2x minus 3. So we'll practice that again with a different equation. So we have 3x squared minus 16x plus 5. Okay, so this plus 5 is interesting because it's telling me that the two signs inside my factors should both be negative or should both be positive, right? But I know it's negative because the two numbers that add up is giving me a negative number, so I know the two signs inside my brackets have to be a negative. So let's go ahead and find factors for my leading coefficient multiplied by my constant, which is going to be 3 times 5, which is 15. Then I'm looking at factors for 15, which add up to 16. Remember, because my sign is the same. So if I have minus 5, minus 10, they add up to minus 15, for example. So let's go ahead and see what factors add up to 16. So if I do 15, 1, 5, 3, so on, the only factors that add up to 16 would be 15 and 1. So what I'm going to do is, again, perform decomposition by introducing 15x, negative 15x, and negative x. So I'm going to rewrite this equation. Negative 15x, negative x, plus 5. So I'm again going to perform grouping by grouping the first two terms and the last two terms, and factoring out a common term from each group. So for my first term, I can factor out a 3x, which will leave me with x minus 5. And from the second group, I can factor out just a negative 1, which leaves me with x minus 5. So then I can recognize that my common terms are going to be x minus 5. So if I factor that out, I'm left with 3x minus 1. So this is my final answer. So how I got to this stage, again, just to recap factoring, I'm going to see if it's a complex or simple trinomial. If it's a complex, I need to look at the factors for my coefficient, leading coefficient, and my constant multiplied together. So in this case, it's 3 times 5 to give me 15. I'm going to look at factors for 15, which add up to negative 16, right? Why am I adding them up? Because my sign in front of my constant is a plus. So the signs inside my bracket should both be the same. So in this case, I got a negative and a negative. How did I know they were both negative? Because I can look at my b value and see, is it positive or negative? If it's negative, that means that the two signs should be negative. If it's positive, that means the two signs should be positive. So we'll move on to the next question. So we're going to do a grade 12 calculus vectors question dealing with limits. So it's a piecewise function, and we're asked to determine the value of each limit if it exists. So we're going to say, for the first one, we have limit as x approaches 1 from the right side. That means we need to pick one of the piecewise functions. So we either pick the top one or the bottom one to evaluate. So if I'm coming from the right side, that means my x is always going to be bigger than 1, right? So I'm going to evaluate the bottom function. So what I do is I'm going to evaluate limit as x goes to 1. I'm sorry, it's -1. So if it's -1, I'm going to see when is it, again, bigger than -1. Right? It's not going to change too much. So my question should be a negative. Yeah, so it's a -1 I'm looking at. So again, I'm just looking at my second function, which is x minus 1. So for this, I can simply plug in my -1 because there's no restriction. It's not going to give me an indeterminate form, which is 0, 0. So I can simply just plug it into my function. So if I plug in -1 minus 1, I end up with a -2. So my limit as x approaches -1 from the right is going to be -2. So the next question, part B, is asking me what's the limit as x approaches -1 from the left hand side. So my x should be less than -1. So I'm looking at my first function, 2 minus x squared. So what is the limit as x approaches -1 from the left hand side for x squared, 2 minus x squared. Right. So once again, I don't have an indeterminate form that will come about if I try to plug it in. So I'm simply going to plug in -1 into my equation. So I have 2 minus -1 squared to leave me with 2 minus 1, which is just 1. So my limit as x approaches -1 from the left hand side is going to be just 1. And my final part of the question is going to be, I have one more, sorry. So what's the limit as x approaches -1 for my function? Not from the right side, not from the left side, just at 1, right? So is it going to exist? That's the question we should be asking ourselves. If we come from the right side, we have a -2. If we come from the left side, we have a 1. So therefore, since x approaches -1 from the left is not equal to limit as x approaches -1 from the right, we're going to say the limit does not exist. So once again, if you have any questions you want us to do on the live, or if you want us to help you with, please send them into our messages. We'll be happy to help you. So we've done 3 parts of the question. So the last part is asking what is f at -1. So when x is -1, we're evaluating the first function, which is 2 minus x squared. So what we do is simply plug it into 2 minus x squared, which we've done before. So we're just going to do that again, which is just 2 minus 1, so it's just going to be 1. So when f at -1, my function is going to be 1. So let's get to this. So we're asked to plot using a vertex form. So this is a grade 10 math question. So we're plotting y is equal to -x plus 3 squared plus 4. So this is already in vertex form, so what we need to do is extract information from this equation. So what's my vertex form? It's going to be the negative value inside the bracket will be my x point, so it's going to be -3. And then my y value will be my constant that's added at the very end. So it's just, my vertex is going to be at -3 and 4. So if I plot this point, so -3 and 4 is going to be here, that's going to be my vertex. Now, what else can I get from this graph? From this function, I can figure out, is it opening upwards or downwards? I can figure that out by the sign in front of my brackets. If it's a negative, my function should be opening downwards. If it's a positive, my function should be opening upwards. So I know it's opening downwards because of my negative sign in front of my brackets. Right? So would I be able to find the roots of this function, or the x-intercepts? I can expand this and try to come up with factors for this, but I'm not going to at this point. So I'm going to draw a rough graph of what this is going to look like. Okay. An alternative method would be to draw a table of values, so plot x and y on a table of values and go about my vertex. So I can go -3, -2, -1, 0, and then I can even increase, so I can go to the left by going -4, -5, -6, just to get an idea of what the points would be. So this is a grade 11 functions question, so it's a sinusoidal application. So it's telling me there's a Ferris wheel with a diameter of 20 meters, it's 1 meter above the ground, and takes 4 minutes to complete a revolution. Assume you start at the bottom of this Ferris wheel, what's the elevation at 15 seconds? So we need to come up with an equation that's going to model this system. So let's draw a brief diagram to show what this is going to look like. So we know the diameter is going to be 20 meters. And it's 1 meter above the ground. And it takes 4 minutes to complete a full revolution. Right? So that's going to be 4 minutes. So what we can get from this is a couple of things. So what we should be doing is using sine or cos to model this as a function. Right? So what's the period for this? So my period is usually 360 divided by k, right? But we need to find a k value to plug it into my function. So it's usually in the form of sine or cos a, and it's going to be a k value x minus t plus a c value, right? This c value is your y transformation. It's translating up or down. This d is translating it left or right. This k is going to be your compression, so stretch in the horizontal direction, so your period can be stretched or compressed, and your a is going to be a vertical stretch or compression, so how much is your amplitude going to be changing by, right? So I need to find these values. I need to find k, d, c, and a. So for k, I said my period is 360 over k, so I can find my k by doing 360 divided by my period. So that's my period. My period is going to be, they said 4 minutes. If I wanted it in seconds, I'm going to change the 4 minutes into seconds. So 4 times 60 gives me 240 seconds. So I'm going to do k is equal to 360 divided by 240 seconds. So this simplifies to 3 over 2. So that's my k value. Okay, so my c value I can obtain by doing max plus min divided by 2. So what's your maximum point? The maximum point is the highest point on this Ferris wheel, which is 20 plus 1 meter, so this is 21. Your minimum point is just 1 meter above the ground. So I'm going to say max is 21 plus min is just 1. That's going to be 22 divided by 2. So your C is going to be 11. So we found 2 of the variables, so let's go ahead and see what the others can be. So A is going to be my amplitude. My amplitude is how much is my distance from the ground changing. So the most it can change is by 20 meters, right? But I'm getting half of that. So my A is going to be 20 over 2, so it's going to be just 10 meters. So I don't really use units in my function, so I'm just going to leave it as 10. So am I moving it left or right? So they're telling me that I'm assuming that you start from the bottom of the Ferris wheel. So I can say, I can plot what the usual cos function looks like. So cos is usually this. So it's starting at the highest most point, right? So if I'm starting at the lowest point, that means my cos would be the opposite. So my cos would be something like this. So if it starts all the way at the bottom, that means my cos should be reflected on the x-axis, right? So that means my a value could be a negative. It's going to be a negative 10. So I'm going to compute all this together. So the d value, again, it's a translation in left or right. I don't really have a translation left or right because I can start all the way at the bottom. So I'm going to put all these together. So y is equal to my a, I said was 10. It's a negative 10. And then I said cos, my k is 3 over 2. And then I have x. I don't have any shift left or right. And then I have a translation up by 11. So this is the function I'm going to model with. So the question is asking me, what is the elevation after 15 seconds? So I can simply plug in 15 to give me negative 10 cos 3 over 2 times 15 plus 11. Right? So this ends up being negative 20. Okay, sorry, it should be positive 20. So it's going to be positive 20 meters above the ground. So I'm just going to draw a brief idea of what the graph should look like. So if you're starting at the very bottom, you start all the way here. So this is going to be 1 meters. And then you start here and you go up, come back down, and this should take 4 minutes because it takes 1 full revolution. So the difference between the lowest and the highest point would be 20 meters. Right, because that's my diameter. So these are the important features of the graph. So this would be, if I start at 0 seconds, this would be 240 seconds. Okay, so the next part of the question is, when is the first time the rider is 11 meters above the ground? So we need to find the x value now, given a y. So I'm given the y, which is 11. So 11 is equal to the same equation, so negative 10 cos 3 over 2 x plus 11. So then if I bring the 11 over, I have 11 minus 11 is negative 10 cos 3 over 2 x. So then you end up with 0 on the left side, so you get cos 3 over 2 x is equal to 0. So when is 3 over 2 x is equal to cos inverse of 0. And then you're finding values of x. Right? So x could be cos inverse 0 would be 90. So you had 3 over 2 on this side, which leaves you with x is equal to 90 times 2 over 3. In other words, it's just going to be x is equal to 60. Right? So the units are going to be 60 seconds. And my answer is 60. So let's go back. Let's go through what we did. So we modeled a function that tells me how the Ferris wheel is going to go up and down. And my y is telling me what's the distance above the ground, and my x is how long has it been, my time in seconds. So I came up with that equation, and they're asking me how long would it be when my distance above the ground is 11 meters. So I plugged in 11 into my y, and I solved for what the time is, so which is my x value. So I simplified my equation. I brought the 11 over. 11 minus 11 is 0. Divided both sides by negative 10. 0 divided by 10 is 0 again, which left me with cos of 3 over 2x equals 0. When is cos 0? If we draw just a function again, it's going to be when it's 90 and when it's 270. They're asking me the closest point, so it's easy just to tell me 90. So then I have x is equal to 60 seconds. So let's go ahead to the next question. So this equation is asking me to find the radius of the circle. Okay, so the arc is formed by the arc of a circle. Determine the radius of the circle, state any assumptions, and so on. Okay, so let's just go ahead and draw a circle. So we have 16 meters. This is 4 meters. So if I have this as my radius, I have 4 meters on this side. So I can imagine that this is my radius. So my radius is going to be this, the 4 meters plus whatever distance that this part makes. So I'm going to say that part is radius minus 4. Right? And I know the distance of this half rectangle. So this is going to be 8 meters because my full length is 16 meters. Right? I'm going to say this is the center of the circle, and then I'm essentially going to write an equation for my circle. So I have r squared is equal to x squared plus y squared, and my x is going to be this 8. So I have 8 squared plus r minus 4 squared. Okay, so why is it 8? Because this is my x value and this is my y value. So my x is going to be just 8, which is I found over here, and my y is going to be r minus 4. So then what I can do is isolate for my r variable. So I'm going to expand my equations to give me r squared is equal to 8 squared plus r squared minus 8r plus 16. So then my r squares get cancelled out to give me 8 squared, which is 64, minus 8r plus 16, and then I can bring that 8r to the other side to give me 80, and my r is going to be 10. Hey, so just a quick update again, we're going live next on Wednesday at the same time at 8 p.m. So if you have any questions you want us to do, send them in then. Thank you for tuning in once again. If you have any math questions that you would like help in, send them to our DMs. We'll be happy to help you. So this has been T from Ask Zylor, and hope you have a good night.